Okay, I think we're ready to get started. It's my pleasure this afternoon to welcome a friend and colleague, Dr. Mark Gilbert, as this afternoon's Grand Round speaker. Dr. Gilbert is the director of the Mind-Body Medicine Skills Group program at the Arizona Health Sciences Center. He's also the director of the Professional Development and Associate Director of Psychosocial Oncology at the Arizona Cancer Center. The former Director of Consultation Liaison Psychiatry in our department, and an Assistant Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Arizona College of Medicine. Dr. Gilbert has practiced psychiatry for over 3 decades after graduating from UCLA's residency program. He has a full affiliation with the Reproductive Health Center in Tucson, leads medical student courses in mind-body medicine, physician self-care, and coping with life-threatening and chronic illness. He is a contributing member of the Psychosocial Oncology and Mind-Body Medicine for the Integrative Oncology Fellowship and Student Elective Program, respectively, at the Arizona Center for Integrative Medicine. He is also a board member of the newly constructed International Network for Integrative Mental Health. Dr. Gilbert was the co-director of one of the first integrative medical clinics in Canada and the director of the Eye of the Hurricane Mind-Body Medicine Skills Group program in Toronto for over 15 years. This afternoon, Dr. Gilbert will be discussing humanism and healthcare. His topic is entitled No Time for Compassion, Humanism and Healthcare, definition, implementation, and challenges for 2011. And I should add that Dr. Gilbert has nothing to disclose that would represent a conflict of interest in today's presentation. Dr. Gilbert.
Thank you, Dr. Mishashik. Hi, everybody. So today we're going to talk about a topic that one would hope one wouldn't have to talk about, that it would be a natural phenomenon. Unfortunately, it's become not so. And we're going to talk about the definition of medical humanism and all the challenges we face about it. This talk is going to go for just over an hour or so, and I'm going to end the talk in an unusual way, perhaps, for Grand Rounds. We're going to do a meditation to end this talk. And so I'm going to ask you, if you have to leave, please leave just before that meditation and not during it. It's only 2 or 3 minutes long. Hippocrates, the forefather of our field, said, quote, "The patient, though conscious that his condition is perilous, may recover his health simply through his contentment with the goodness of the physician." Wow, what a statement. I'm going to talk with you for the next several minutes about a case example. In medicine, psychiatry, we give grand rounds, you have to have a case example. So I'm going to give you a case example. This case example is a very personal case example, because this case example was about my mother. This case example also happened in a hospital in Toronto, Canada. And you may say, well, you know, hospitals there, they're different. Well, in fact, having directed the Consultation Liaison program here for over 2 years, there wasn't a lot of difference in what I saw in this hospital, even though we have, I remind us, wonderful, wonderful components in this hospital and wonderful clinicians. And we saw this in particular in its purest form just a couple of weeks ago. But I want to remind us what we're missing. My 86-year-old mother had a displaced fracture of the hip in exercise class on July the 23rd, 2010. I flew to her the next day. She had a 10-hour wait in the emergency room. The hospital abides by the Ontario government's new 48-hour surgical deadline rule for hip fractures, but the staff told me that by admitting to the floor, they could avoid that rule. My mother was admitted to the oncology floor, as there were no beds on ortho. My mother waited in pain for 3 days due to trauma cases taking up the 2 ortho OR rooms. She was lucky. On day 3, she was becoming delirious, asking if we saw the bugs on the drape and ceiling. As you know, or hopefully you know, for elderly patients waiting for hip fractures, the longer they wait for surgery, the much greater their morbidity and mortality rate is. That's been proven through research. So we were informed the average wait may take 5 to 7 days. There is a shortage of nurses in OR space, so as with many loving families, my sister and myself set up 24-hour vigil at the hospital. The hospital instituted a new speaker system to page nurses and staff to rooms and beds. It replaced the old system, was supposed to be quieter. This was louder. Each speaker is situated just behind each head of the patient's bed. It was cheaper to put the system into the old wiring. The speaker is used by a shouting ward clerk, roughly on average every 2 to 3 minutes to 10 minutes, 24/7. The oncology ward also had a new technologically advanced IV monitor. They relayed information on speed of drip, empty bags, etc., directly to the nursing station. An alert, this one, which I taped, beeps loudly every time something is detected as unusual. This would include a patient raising their elbow and scratching their head, or the pillow being on the IV tube. Thank you. Our mother's taken to surgery with 30 minutes notice on July the 25th. We were visited by a pleasant chief resident. We asked that she have an epidural and avoid general anesthesia due to her early Alzheimer's. He would try to relay the information to the surgeon. Who is the surgeon, we asked. They weren't sure yet. Our mother was in surgery for 2.5 hours. We sat in a critical care post-op room used for that and general surgery. The woman with the desk was a volunteer who was pleasant and on top of her job. She kept everyone informed. 3 hours went by. The volunteer calls the OR. She doesn't know why the orthopod hadn't come down to see us. Recovery said Mom was out of surgery. We hear him paged. The volunteer got no answer and told us she was about to leave, but that the volunteer behind her, quote, was almost always late if she comes at all. 30 minutes later, there was still no attending. Our friendly resident returned. The surgery was excellent, he said, a technologically great surgeon. But he would not be seeing us as he didn't have patients at this hospital. He was just filling in on rotation for the weekend. The resident stated he was probably the most consistent person there, so he would be communicating with us. Our mother would be transferred back to oncology when stable. There were still no beds available on ortho. Oxymorphine arrived on time and kept my mother quieted. When she alerted, Zofran kept her less nauseous, and Coumadin kept her blood from clotting in her calves. The miraculous beeping machine kept my mother's IV monitored and her sleep from happening. Physiotherapy arrived on her post-op day and got her sitting up. They were excellent, but said on this ward they could only visit once a day. The noise and bright lights continued, no sleep. The oncology nurses were trying their hardest to keep up with their duties and paperwork. They didn't know how to turn a hip fracture patient or how often, and no one talked to our mother about exercising her calves or working her lungs to avoid pneumonia. She had been lying in one place for almost 5 days and complained of a sore back. We insisted on her being turned, and the nurse waiting for someone to help turn her. The wait lasted an hour and a half. They did it in a position that the physio told us to avoid. The patient across from my mother's bed needed to go to the washroom. She had multiple broken bones from a car accident. The woman in the bed next to her on chemotherapy was vomiting. The woman in need to urinate beeped for a nurse 4 times. We heard the speaker system alert for a nurse. We heard the nurse on the 3rd call rushing past the room and down the hall muttering to the paging ward clerk, "I heard you, stop bugging me." My sister tried to find the nurse who cared for the vomiting patient. I went to look for someone to relieve the urine urgent patient 30 minutes later. I see no one but a resident and a staff member. I told the resident and she said, "You have to get a nurse. They, quote, take care of that." I find the ward clerk and raise my voice in anger and frustration. I heard her page the same nurse, but a minute later an assistant showed up to help. She apologized to the patient saying she, quote, didn't know you needed to go. During our breaks, we ate lunch in the cafeteria that, like our own, serves 95% of beverages with added sugar or fructose corn syrup, high-sugar muffins and other pastries, white bread sandwiches, and high-fat main meals. At least we have a salad bar in our hospital. They did not. On one break, together, my sister and I walked next door and spent 10 minutes looking at the relatively new cancer clinic. This is the 6th largest comprehensive cancer clinic center in North America. And it's brand new. About 200 people sat in a very large sunlit-filled hall with hundreds of chairs waiting for their numbers to come up for lab work or chemotherapy, the latter taken in a small windowless cubicle. I saw 2 patients crying, reassuring each other. There were bulletin boards with 14 announcements about different support groups, massage, and other flyers, but one would likely be too overwhelmed to read all the words. And there were no people present to help if you needed any. Mom received her supper that she didn't want, a cold omelet and plastic container of sugar syrup peach halves. We were told the surgeon will tell us how long she stays in the hospital, but we've never seen any surgeon, and she had been transferred now to 2 different ones. I left my sister so I can return to work. We have done the 24-hour, 5-day shift of vigilance that concerned family members must do for loved ones in the 21st century. I arranged with my sister to hire help to give her respite, though we know that they will never replace our vigilance. My mother keeps asking when she can go home. She has urinated in her bed 4 times after the catheter came out because no nurse came. She was transferred to ortho on day 7, which was much better for her physio, but she had developed an E. coli UTI infection and had been transferred to a private isolation room for 1 week. I remember my mother holding our hands back by her bedside. She said that that was what got her through, us holding her hand. And this is my mother in her last couple of days in hospital, starting to smile again. And I'm glad to report that she is now up with a cane after a month in a physio rehab unit and starting to get around. The American Medical Student Association Humanistic Medicine Group advocates, they say, for healing, community support, creative expression, and complementary and alternative medicine education. And they have some of these parts correct, as we'll see. They say we advocate for patients and developing physicians who consider healing to be a sacred interpersonal experience between mindful and authentic human beings. Our action projects and programming strongly emphasize and celebrate the human's ability to heal oneself and one another through understanding, community, creativity, personal reflection, and a connection with human heritage and the earth, which they call complementary and alternative medicine in their definition. I'm a stickler for definitions, so we're talking in this talk where you're listening to me talk about humanistic medicine. So what do we mean by this term humanistic, and what do we mean by humanistic medicine? Mosby's Dictionary of Complementary and Alternative Medicine says humanistic healthcare is an approach to medicine that emphasizes the relationship between caregiver and patient, characterized by collaboration, dignity, empathy, and trust. Well, they have that part right as well. The word humanism actually has come to mean a philosophy about how to live one's life. It is a model of thought or action in which human interests, values, and dignity are taken to be of primary importance. It is not the same as humanities. Those words are separate and different. The humanities, as you see here, are a group of subjects relating to art and human experience, such as art, sociology, literature, and others. It's the totality of disciplines which study human nature and the achievements of man as being capable of culture. There is an overlap between the two, but they certainly don't mean the same thing. Well, where did this word start from? It actually only started, humanism, in the 19th century. It was a German term, and the word humanismus actually was taken by them to discuss and talk about Renaissance Italians. And for any of you who have the good fortune, like I have had, to visit Florence in Italy, you'll learn about the Renaissance period in their art and literature and about the umanisti, who were the people who were scholars, but pretty well mainly referring to literature, but also in art. And they had a revival of interest in the classics. Humanism also is a return of beauty and style in the late 18th, early 19th century. It referred to man's potential with proper cultivation in philosophy or attitude. And then in the 20th century, we started to have it as a reference for existentialism or social humanism, a philosophy or attitude of life independent of scholarly activities. So it became an independent piece, but with a connection to the humanities. There's also, of course, this term humanism with a capital H, which is a stance, a comprehensive life stance that upholds reason, ethics, and justice and rejects supernaturalism. Well, the 21st century, over this past 50 years, what do we have? All sorts of, this is what we do nowadays, right? We take a word and we make it into a million different things. So you've got all these different forms of humanism now, including, as you can see, a religious humanism. Okay? So humanism has really, but we're talking here about medical humanism. I like this I put this together just as a little reminder to myself, HM equals CAM to the third. So really the components that the AMSA had talked about compassion, awareness, and mindfulness, client-centered, authentic sharing, meaning and purpose, and with the implementation also of complementary and alternative medicines. But that's not the whole picture either. This says, does it say anything about secular humanism, as Moses was coming down with his tablets? Humanistic medicine. So where did this term develop? Well, it actually started at Esalen in the early 70s. And for those of you who are that old like me, you'll know that Esalen was a center of real existential and experiential awareness, especially in our field back in the 70s. A lot of Gestalt exercises going on there. But there was another serious-minded group which started to develop what was called the Program in Humanistic Medicine. 20 carefully medical professionals, selected medical professionals, met monthly for 3 years. One of the colleagues who I love, who's coming here to talk in March, Rachel Remen, was a member of that group. They came to explore various human growth methods, somatic disciplines, Eastern spiritual practices, and alternative medical models to a more humane practice of medicine. And this program also trained and consulted for SAMA, the Student American Medical Association, which became AMSA. They acknowledged mind, body, and soul, an emphasis on empathy, patience, and compassion. They addressed the part of suffering that is about being isolated. They used narrative medicine, storytelling, and active listening, utilizing empathy, reflection, professionalism, and trustworthiness, and patient empowerment, which is a tough one in our field, an equal partnership between patient and physician, not a hierarchy, to avoid obscuring the humanity of the patient. And came up, finally, with this definition. The first definition, really, seen in this field. With the term humanistic medicine, we refer to a mode of practice that promotes concern for the experiences of our fellow humans and practices compassion, beneficence, concern, gentleness, communication, patience, fidelity to duty, and virtue. So humanistic medicine today also has another couple of terms related to it, which is patient-centered medicine, which is kind of a weird one because isn't that what it's always supposed to have been? But now we've had to force ourselves to come back to that, or client-centered versus case-centered or illness-centered. The Aussies down under don't use the term humanistic medicine. They use the term values-based medicine, but it means roughly the same thing, and their emphasis is on the value of the individual human life in quantity and quality, and the importance to both individual and communities about human security and nourishing. Albert Schweitzer. Ethics cannot be based upon our obligations towards people, but they are complete and natural only when we feel this reverence for life and the desire to have compassion for and to help all creatures in so far as it is in our power. I think that this ethic will become more and more recognized because of its great naturalness and because it is the foundation of a true humanism towards which we must strive if our culture is to become truly ethical. Here's an example of not humanistic medicine. You've got a lousy bedside manner. In the modern era, the science of curing has overshadowed the art of healing. Because of the success of science, we lapse into a belief that science alone holds the keys to the relief of suffering. Sula Barron at Stanford had this wonderful statement: we have lost the balance in the learning and professing of medicine between knowledge, science, and wisdom, humanism, and have become a group of professionals who are brilliant and relentless in memorizing and understanding complex facts, but who flounder in the application of those facts to human beings. I would have been here sooner if not for a wonderful, caring, competent doctor. In the healthcare fields, humanism is strongly linked to authentic professionalism. It's a way of being. It involves a passionate service to help our fellow human beings. Healing. Now, in other grand rounds and at other times, I have talked about this definition, which I developed over that period of almost 20 years running, co-directing that integrative medical clinic in Toronto. And this is out of seeing those thousands of patients and looking wherever that word came up, very rarely in major medical journals in the past 50 years, we came up with this definition. Healing is an intentional process by which a human being is motivated to accept their authentic life through the exploration of internal thoughts, feelings, physical and spiritual connections in a non-judgmental way and in a trusting environment. As the result of this acceptance, meaning and purpose transforms suffering, and the individual's perception is that life's harmony and integrity are restored. And I may have mentioned before that I say this literally of people who I take intakes for, who I do assessments for the Eye of the Hurricane group. These patients who have life-threatening and chronic physical illnesses and conditions, I make sure they read this definition on my wall, or I read it to them wherever I am, so they know what they're getting into when they come into our group. And I have to tell you, over half of them, over half in 15 years, become teary-eyed. Why is that? Why would they become teary-eyed looking at this definition? Because they're not getting it anywhere else in medicine. They don't hear about it, and it's not being addressed in most places. Healing involves communication, integrity, respect, and compassion. Active listening, understanding of the biopsychosocial context, trust, empathy, humor, appropriate self-revelation, psychosocial therapeutic strategies. It is the central goal of the humanistic physician. It is fundamentally individual and irreducibly personal. For effective healing, my strong bias over all these years of doing this work of 3 decades is who the healer is as important as what the healer does, practicing an authentic joining of science and art. So the central goal for students is to understand how their personal histories and their own personal lives, their values, attitudes, and biases affect the care of patients, and to be used for the patient's benefit, to ensure they care for themselves physically and emotionally and seek opportunities for enhancing that personal awareness and personal growth. And we are starting to lose that in our field of psychiatry. There's a need for medical students, residents, nursing, and physician self-awareness and self-care groups, whether they be mind-body groups, finding meaning in medicine groups, or others. Self-awareness is the prerequisite to healing and should be a mandatory component in the training of all healing professionals. Rachel says this statement, which I really I think needs to be buttoned down to our walls. When we fix a person, we perceive them as broken, and we act to cure them. The schooling of medicine teaches us what is wrong and how to fix ailments. For a patient with chronic illness and/or life-threatening illness, fixing is a goal, but also may be a form of judgment. When we serve a patient, we see and trust their wholeness and foster their hope and promote healing. Moses ben Maimonides, the famous physician, teach your tongue to say, I do not know, and you will progress. So in psychiatry, of course, one of the first things students learn is about the mental status examination. And I have a particular strong bias about this and have spoken with most of our residents and medical students when they come through about, and those of you here have heard me say, what's the most important piece to me on a mental status examination? And what is the most neglected piece on a mental status examination? So which is the one missing here? What's the piece missing in this list? Judgment. Thank you, Michael. Judgment is missing. But in psychiatry, we really look at judgment as being a cognitive piece when we're doing assessments for people with dementia, right? Or we're trying to make an assessment on whether they have appropriate cognitive judgment. And what's the question in all the major textbooks? You ask a patient about judgment. If you find a self-addressed stamped envelope on the street, what do you do with it? That's how you decide somebody's judgment. I have a much broader definition of what judgment means, and for me, it's the most important piece for our patients. So how do I define judgment in this broader way? There it is. Judgment is appropriate if the patient is able to respect their own emotional, physical, cognitive, and spiritual health and those of their intimate others if they have them. So most of the people who we see come into our clinics don't have that. That's a challenge and yet a goal. What about clinician judgment? A clinician's judgment is appropriate if the clinician is able to respect their own emotional, physical, cognitive, and spiritual health and those of the patients in their care. Here's an example of poor judgment. Some of you may know this guy, but I just thought I'd throw this in. It's bad judgment.
It's quite a lovely Jackson Pollock, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
What does it say to you?
It restates the negativeness of the universe, the hideous, lonely emptiness of existence, nothingness, the predicament of man forced to live in a barren, godless eternity, like a tiny flame flickering in an immense void with nothing but waste, horror, and degradation, forming a useless, bleak straitjacket in a black, absurd cosmos.
What are you doing Saturday night?
Committing suicide.
What about Friday night?
She said she's committing suicide. Well, what about Friday night? That's poor judgment. Illness and recovery, living and dying, are part of the entire human experience. Every individual within the healthcare system, whether the caregiver or the patient, is first and foremost a human being. It needs to be emphasized to aspiring health professionals that to be successful, it needs more than skill, a sharp mind, and a steady hand. The best health professionals have a heart, not just a brain. They have a human touch. Talking about human touch before we get into some statistics here, because we have to show you some research. I'm going to tell you a story about my colonoscopy. No, actually, I'm not going to give you the details of my colonoscopy, but I'll tell you a brief moment that happened in my colonoscopy. It was just a general follow-up that I put off for a number of years and shouldn't have about a year and a half ago. I went to get this routine colonoscopy done, and I asked them not to have any propofol or an anesthesia because I wanted to go back to work in the afternoon. And the guy looked at me and said, "Oh, you're a doctor, right?" I said, "Well, yeah, I'm a doctor." He said, "But I really don't want to have that because I really want to go." Okay, fine. You sure? Yeah. So I came to the clinic that morning, and I was presented with some papers. "Okay, you sign here for the anesthetic." I said, "I'm not having it." She looked at me, "What?" "Oh, we had one of those like a year ago or something." "Oh, yeah." So I get on the table, and after a few minutes, I'm feeling like maybe I shouldn't have done this, right? And then after a few minutes, I feel somebody touching my arm. And I suddenly settled. I felt calmed. And I felt like, wow, boy, is that ever, boy, that's unusual, and that's so helpful. It felt so calming to me, and I said, I can do this. I can get through this. After about 20 or 30 seconds, this touching hand started to feel more and more pressure, and it turns out it was the blood pressure cuff. It was the automatic blood pressure cuff. And I said, oh my God, it's the blood pressure cuff. It has nothing to do with a hand. But then I realized that just my perception that it was a hand had worked. So from that point on, I decided that I was going to image the blood pressure cuff as if it was a caring hand when it wasn't squeezing so tight. And that's what I used to get me through. So it's our perception that helps us to get through in those ways, and that's a critical thing for clinicians to know about. Okay, 2011. As you well know, physicians in general are overwhelmed. Burnout, mood disorders, addictions, aloofness leads to aloofness, arrogance, and authoritativeness. Changes in financing, a drive for interventions to improve effectiveness, mergers, acquisitions, integration, restructuring, whole systems, and total quality initiatives. They're all being tried now. We're in the middle of a merger. And yet, we still have challenges in organizational effectiveness, cost reduction, and service quality, despite all this. Be overwhelmed, traits, high-pitched squeals of desperation, constant haunted look, warning, love life non-existent. The cost of our healthcare system is about $2.3 trillion right now in this country, and as some of you may know, the World Health Organization lists us again this year as 37th in terms of rating as quality care in the world. We're one above Slovenia. By the way, Canada's number 30th, not so good. The top three are France, Italy, and the Netherlands. And we don't have time to discuss why right now, but they have a joint system of private and public, and they're much more socialized systems, and their cultures are different in some ways too. So why? Why 37th? We have a growing physician shortage, over-specialization and misdistribution of MDs, a steady decline in medical student graduates seeking to be family doctors. A lot of them now, as you know, are going to be hospitalists. They have regular hours and other subspecialties. Proposed higher premiums for Medicare beneficiaries, powerful health insurance lobbies, and powerful influences of pharmaceutical companies. We have an unregulated free market with market values sometimes overshadowing academic values of teaching, research, and patient care, resulting in teaching shortages, conflicting systems, and a war for dollars. What have we lost in all of this? Personal connection. Here is an example I'm going to give you for a moment. I'm just going to get out of here for a second. In terms of personal connection, the personal connection piece. So let's look at this physician for a moment.
My name is W.G. Watson. I've lived with somewhere between 15 and 18,000 babies. They say I'll be 100 years old. It doesn't feel like it.
He still makes house calls. He's delivered generations of babies. So that's, unheard of.
Full house.
Full house.
Plenty help.
Plenty help.
Patients bragging on you.
Patients bragging on us, as always.
Went to med school in 1939. Came out the service and have been practicing OB-GYN since May 47. I don't go anywhere that I don't see somebody I deliver.
People recognize him everywhere. And if we go to Publix, he likes to go in, and he delivered 3 of the bag boys there.
I stopped delivering babies in '96 and stopped surgery around the same time when my vision was not as good. I see patients now for checkups every day and plan on continuing for seeing them.
I am Dr. Watson's partner, and I've also been delivered by Dr. Watson. Dr. Watson's work ethic is probably unsurpassed by anybody. He was the day when there were no beepers. He'd either be at the hospital or be at home or church. The police would stop him in the highway and find him if he had to come back to the hospital.
Lots of families, I live with the mother and I live with the children.
I've been a patient of Dr. Watson's for 58 years, going on 59. Dr. Watson delivered all my babies. You couldn't find another one like him because he's the best. He delivered all 5 of mine. and he delivered 12 of the grandchildren.
Dr. Watson is old school. When he goes to the hospital, it's all about taking care of their patients, and they saw that and they rewarded him by naming it Women's Watson Center.
You got your family you take care of, feel close to, and patients the same way. You feel close to them, you work with them. You think and you're trying to help them. I'm not planning on retiring. I know. I have something to get up for every month.
Okay, so our physician. Now, 23 randomly selected obstetrics and gynecological residency programs in the United States were studied 4.5 years ago. The majority showed evidence of moderate burnout, and 34% were considered clinically depressed. So we have that stat. 58% of all family practice docs in this country report high scores in emotional exhaustion. 56% of oncologists report being burned out. 60% of emergency room docs report moderate to high burnout. 20% of medical school faculty report high numbers of depressive symptoms. The report of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention claimed that on average, death by suicide is about 70% more likely among male physicians than among other professionals, and 250 to 400% higher among female doctors. The major cause being stress and depression. Cynicism in our field, in part in the way we're taught, becomes stoicism. 80% work when they're too ill to work. They visit physicians at a rate a quarter of the national average. 52% prescribe for themselves. That's probably an underestimate. 20% of female doctors don't get pap tests or mammograms. They take very few true vacation days. 70% report stress-related ailments, but only 15% seek help. A study in Massachusetts of young practicing physicians showed that 50% were unsure if they would choose a medical career again, about half. The majority were less satisfied than their predecessors with time spent with patients, autonomy, and leisure time. So we're dealing here also with these two words, evidence-based. Evidence-based practice aims to put medicine on a firm scientific footing. Experts evaluate the best available data and develop clinical guidelines designed to standardize procedures and therapies. It's gotten us a long way. It's important in this field. Medical humanism models seek to understand the patient as a person focusing on individual values, goals, and preferences with respect to clinical decision. Which should we choose? Well, the obvious answer is both. But one of them is starting to outweigh another. These two are on a collision course right now in 2011, and nowhere is it the field more split than in our field of psychiatry. A divide is created between a respect for human complexity, which we can't fully systematize, and loyalty to the behavioral sciences, which aims to categorize, explain, and predict human behavior empirically. Psychiatrists in 2011 have a difficult time deciding between science and humanism, like between medication or psychotherapy, but are faced daily with the question of how to incorporate the two or not incorporate them. E.O. Wilson, many of you probably know, the famous biologist, he believed all facts and theories could be linked to create a common groundwork for explaining all natural sciences, and eventually, by the way, all behavioral sciences. He called that consilience. So eventually, we're going to be able to get down to the science of everything. Dupre, a philosopher rather, sees life due to its incredible complexity, that is, the disorder of things, the chaos of things. Psychiatry right now is headed much more down Wilson's path. There's a famous essay by the philosopher Thomas Nagel. It's called, "What is it like to be a bat?" And what he talks about in the essay is that you can study a bat's neurology, the entire neuroanatomical system and physiology of a bat and understand completely how a bat uses sonar radar, the amount of vision that they have, how they fly exactly, but never will we be able to know what life looks like through a bat's eyes. The priorities of the hidden medical school curriculum: restricted duty hours, documentation, nobody here is familiar with that, efficiency, effective charting, organization, and quick patient turnaround, helping residents, writing the best note, reading for tests, and impressing attending faculty. No time to follow patients individually and longitudinally and build relationships. Where is the balance between ever-increasing durable technologies and the humanistic elements of empathy, caring, civility, integrity, and generosity? And what about the patient? 82% of hospitalized U.S. patients today cannot even identify their main physician in the hospital. Purnell, the greatest challenge facing healthcare professionals in the technological age is to care meaningfully for the whole person and for the wholeness of the person within a system that does not. So I'm going to end today with leading you quickly through the 8 key components of humanistic medicine as the bibliography that you have, or is it available? It is available back there on your way out, demonstrates. So we now have, through the literature in the past 30, 40 years, since the key group met to define this word, what the 8 key components are. Here's the first one. Well, here they all are. The first one is empathy. Empathy, yeah, I can see how that would be useful. The emotional reasoning is the core of clinical empathy. To resonate emotionally with a patient's experience, noticing what is important for the patient from the patient's perspective. The purpose is to better understand the patient. It requires shifting from objectivity and detachment to subjectivity and engagement. Drawbacks, of course, are over-empathy, boundary problems, or over-identification, which all of us as psychiatrists, of course, are one of the key components we need to learn. Empathy helps to understand the patient's health habits, psychological needs, social situations, process difficult information about diagnosis and treatment, help patient autonomy by participating more in treatments, transform emotional irrationality into positive benefits. It involves healing emotional states and allows a patient's suffering to be real. So we have a couple of studies that came out in 2009. Bless you. 2009. Do patient attributes predict oncologists' empathic responses and patient perceptions of empathy? So these 2 studies that were done at Duke University. And what they did is live videotapes giving oncologists with their patients opportunities for empathic responses to whatever the patient was talking about. So they had up to 100 opportunities for an empathic response. In one study, they had 0. In another, they had about 10%. Oncologists in general, this study said, did not respond empathically to patients' negative emotions and did this equally for most patients. They responded more empathically to patients who were less economically advantaged. So they really zeroed in on instrumental issues, but not necessarily on emotional ones. In this study, 264 audio recorded conversations, the patients expressed fear the most often, but the oncologist related to their fear the least often. And when patients disclose fearful emotions, oncologists more often address the topic causing the fear instead of addressing the emotion itself. Number 2, dignity. Here's the hierarchy of dignity and all the different components of it. And at the top, regard for other and regard for self. It's very difficult to regard others, and that's where the self-awareness piece comes in if you're not self-regarding. Human dignity implies the very denial of an aristocratic order of dignities. It refers to the minimum dignity which belongs to every human qua human. It does not admit of degrees. It is equal for all humans. It cannot be gained or lost. It implies a match between circumstance and competencies. It must be separated from autonomy. A demented patient observes dignity. I have told this story on occasion to residents. My father died over 11 years of Alzheimer's disease, and in the last few seconds of his life, having not recognized my mother or sister and I for 4 or 5 years, in the last seconds of his life, as he was almost chain-stoking and had no IV in, he picked his head up off the pillow and looked at each of us, and to our name, each of us said, "I love you," and then died. And I've asked many neurologists about this, and have they ever seen this happen? Because obviously this was a chilling event for us. And they said, yes, on occasion they have. I'll tell you, long before that happened to me, I have insisted, as we all should, that no one talks in front of a patient as if they're not there. And I have taken a number of medical students and residents and put my arm around them and walked down the hallways in this hospital to remind them of that in certain situations. Dignity is concerned with the worth and value felt and bestowed on persons, and the 4 categories of dignity violation, I think, are really well encapsulated here by Mann. Not being seen only as a member of a group, violations of personal space, and humiliation. All our patients deserve never to have those violations. And as again a brief break from this serious topic, some of you may have seen the show, but here is a little piece on how we have dignity.
Did you actually just page me to find out how much Tylenol to give to Mrs. Lenzner? I was worried that it could exacerbate the patient. It's regular strength Tylenol. Here's what you do. Get her to open her mouth, take a handful, and throw it at her. Whatever sticks, that's the correct dosage. But under no circumstances do you to compromise our no talking agreement. Dr. Kelso, he's always telling me, you gotta stay positive.
I'm gonna go ahead and say this just as carefully as possible so I don't overstate it. Dr. Kelso is the most evil human being on the planet and may in fact be Satan himself.
It's just that this isn't really what I expected, you know. Most of my patients are older and sort of checked out mentally.
Pumpkin, that's modern medicine.
Advances that keep people alive who should have died a long time ago, back when they lost what made them people. Now, your job is to stay sane enough so that when someone does come in that you actually can help, you're not so brain dead that you can't function. For the love of God. What?
Do you really wish me talking about this?
Her? She's dead. Write this down, Nubby. If you push around a stick, nobody will ask you to do anything.
You've been like a father to me.
You've been like a father to me. Morality. One of the most important moral differences between people is between those who miss and those who see various moral features of situations confronting them. Patients must always trust that we are always acting in their best interests. In that contract, models of care have replaced social responsibility. To be moral means to speak up when we've seen wrong. I had to actually put in 2 grievances in this hospital when I was on CL about faculty members here for very unfortunate circumstances, but it was well deserved. Doctors tend to essentialize a problem. I really want you to attend to this. It's really an interesting concept, essentializing. Essentializing consists of deconstructing the situation at hand and the patient's concerns and reconstructing selected elements into a specific clinical problem. Through this reconstruction of the clinical problem, it becomes possible to handle the problem within the scope of biomedicine. We have an answer. Concretizing and essentializing leads to existential filtering. Overlooking existential meanings and focusing on purely functional aspects of patients is an integral part of clinical practice, and it's not an individual flaw. In fact, it's beneficence. But the moral lessons for doctors is that even if their clinically sound decision is morally motivated, it may not necessarily be the morally good thing to do. Mark Twain, always do right. This will gratify some people and astonish the rest. Self-reflection. Number 4. An oft-forgotten and core task of teaching medical students is the learning cycle of practice, self-reflection, and feedback. So, this is what I show med students here in one of my lectures. If your dentist's teeth look like this, would you use this dentist? If your contractor's house looked like this, would you hire this contractor to build your house? If you, as a physician, have little insight and take little care of your mind, body, and soul, should a patient trust you in caring for her or him? Well, most do, it seems. So, in some of those lectures, I give examples, and I don't have the time here to give you all the examples I give, but I'm just going to give you a little snippet of an example. You are the ED resident. Patient is these are all actual patients who were seen in this hospital. The patient is a 76-year-old man who has been sent by an assisted nursing home. His wife died of cancer 14 months ago. His 3 closest and only friends all died in the last 2 years. He has been told he has early Alzheimer's disease. He has no living relatives. He has been starving himself to death for the past month with the intent of killing himself. He pleads with you not to hospitalize him. What feelings are generated in you about this scenario? Does it remind you of any part of your own life story? Does it create any conflicts for you? What feelings do you have in approaching this patient? What areas of your own vulnerability may it tap into, and what areas of strength? So I'm only showing you this because it's an exercise, a beginning exercise in self-awareness with many different kinds of scenarios. Sir William Osler, wonderful physician, Canadian, eh? Yay. It is much more important to know what sort of a patient has a disease than what sort of a disease a patient has. Authenticity, a critical component. An authentic life is the most personal form of worship. Everyday life has become my prayer. So, authenticity, respect, telling the truth, accountability, accepting moral agency, being truthful with oneself and others, professional accountability, tighter links between experience and assessment, seeking what is best for the student, from equanimity to responsibility, accountability to patients, team members, and society, leading to practical wisdom. Humanistic health management. Wow. Well, this is a wonderful statement back in 1925 by Max Weber, who helped to discover bureaucratization, where administrative functions were carried based on purely objective considerations. The more it is developed more perfectly, the more it is dehumanized, the more completely it succeeds in eliminating from official business love, hatred, and all purely personal, irrational, and emotional elements which escape calculation. This was the model that much of our industrial era was built on. Now we've come full cycle. And in fact, I could show you, and this is a short version of this talk, but there's about 10 or 15 major models that happen between these. But now we move to alternate models, when employees embrace organizational values that support caring and compassion. Excessive micromanagement, direction, and supervision concerning their behaviors we now know is unnecessary. There's research proving this. Some is necessary with incorporation of expectations and rewards for communication and positive behaviors. And a sample of positive expectations uses Cooper-Ryder's concept of appreciative inquiry, the artful creation of a positive shared image of the future, one of the things that Dr. Weiss and I are looking at, hopefully implementing at the Cancer Center. The role of women in healthcare, critical components of humanistic medicine. And I'm only going to touch on this very briefly because at the Women's Health Conference this year, I'm going to talk about it in more detail. Women are 44% of the medical school enrollment, and that rate is rising. Minority in some specialties and overrepresented in other medical specialties like family physicians and pediatricians. They form the majority of residents now in family and community medicine programs. In general, women are less likely to work excessive hours and past the age of retirement. They have fewer patients per hour. They have better communication skills, including more preventative care. And the question is, will these findings affect health outcomes? Do we really have to do the medical managed model of, let's see, how many patients can you push through so we get our buck through? Or actually, are we being more efficient in a model that women can provide? Well, we're getting some little hints that that model that they're providing is certainly a more optimal one. And that's for more detailed discussion. Compassion, the last piece, perhaps the most critical piece in humanistic medicine. David Schlimm, the wonderful family physician up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, he started the first Western medical clinic in Kathmandu. And he worked for some time in the Nepal General Hospital there. And he is a wonderful man who's written a book, Compassion in Medicine, with Rinpoche, talking about the gift of compassion in medicine, the act of relieving the suffering of others. Compassion, he's shown, can be trained. Medical students are often fatigued, and the patients who they deal with have their fear and hope augmented due to illnesses. Students reach their limit, as do faculty, and their limit is their limit. Do we have to carry more of others' emotions to be compassionate? So he talks about, from Buddhist philosophy, this model of conceptual versus non-conceptual compassion. Some of you here may be very well aware of that. Conceptual compassion, which is very often used in our Western society, is the try harder model. Try harder by using the charge in your battery and ration. Okay, I'll go see this extra patient tonight in the hospital because I really want to do it. They're suffering, but I'm so exhausted. It eventually runs down, or it can't charge to the same level. You need a holiday. You take the vacation, you come back. A few hours after you come back from vacation, you feel exhausted. Where did the vacation go? Non-conceptual compassion is not about that. It's spontaneous warmth and compassion that pre-exists. It's already there. It doesn't need an object to exist, and it doesn't ever disappear. There's no wearing down of it. Clarity of natural wisdom and consciousness, that is, you can perceive anything, but you don't form a concept based on it. Attachment to thoughts and emotions, he says, cloud our compassion. We are naturally more compassionate when we are relaxed. It remains essential to observe our own thoughts, be self-aware, learn to meditate to find compassion. In his philosophy, birth, old age, sickness, and death are the causes of suffering. Pain, chronicity, loss, and illness may be incurable, unstable, and unpredictable. We cannot ever permanently establish good health or permanently avoid death. So all we are doing here as clinicians is trying to relieve suffering. Compassion means to be intensely together with those who suffer. The point of this attentive presence with the patient is not on curing or fixing a problem. Instead, it's simply being with them in the moment. It welcomes and provides sanctuary for all that is unpredictable, imperfect, incomplete, awkward, pinched, and unspoken. And one of the key roads to compassion in this way is being mindful. So mindfulness is where we're asked to enter an encounter with our focus on the relationship at hand in the moment without judgment, attending to both the patient and to ourselves, being as aware as possible in the moment. 4 habits are required: attentive observation, patient, ourselves, the patient's problems, critical curiosity, seeing our own weakness in a situation, looking with a fresh eye, with tolerance of contradiction, That is, being able to hold the situation where there may not be perfect answers, and presence with connection and compassion. And here is just finally a study by Michael Krasner, some of you may be aware of, at the University of Syracuse, a single group cohort study evaluating the effectiveness of mindfulness and self-awareness curriculum on primary care physician burnout. And what they did is they trained these clinicians, a lot of them, in a 52-hour curriculum about appreciative inquiry, narrative medicine, and mindfulness meditation. The results were striking. Participants had large increases in mindfulness skills and orientation that were immediately detectable and sustained for up to 15 months. The physicians also had large, durable improvements in burnout, mood disturbance, and empathy. These changes correlated with the improvement in mindfulness, suggesting that enhancing physicians' attention to their own experience not only increases their orientation towards patients, but also reduces physician distress. And this very interesting one, a controlled trial done that evaluated the longitudinal effect of physician self-care programs on malpractice claims at 22 participating hospitals relative to 22 control hospitals, malpractice claims over the ensuing year were reduced by 70% at intervention hospitals compared with a 3% reduction at control hospitals. In summary in this talk, the starting requirements for humanistic medicine. Medical and nursing school curricula that teach courses in self-reflective medicine and a longitudinal clerkship program, such as is being tried right now at UCSF in their Pisces program. Medical and nursing school curricula that involve students in small group learning centered on integrative medical models, reacquaintance with professional purpose, self-awareness, and skills for effective communication, empathy, compassion, and mindfulness. Healthcare management models that allow the health worker to feel heard, effective, a team player, and with influential input. Incentivizing medical resident training programs to family medicine, to preventative medicine, and integrative medicine with more input from women physicians. Research into the interpersonal placebo effects as theorized by Kapchick and the cost-effectiveness of these. A medical model that emphasizes healing as much as it does curing, and an emphasis returning to outcome rather than how it gets done. And the use, of course, of complementary and alternative modalities, as we saw prescribed for by AMSA, including many and all of these. May we always strive to hear the patient's story and balance their instrumental care with the wholeness of their being and the commitment of our presence. So again, I'm going to end this with about a 3-minute meditation exercise. If anybody has to leave before 3 minutes, please do so now. So this meditation exercise is taken and based on a compassion medicine meditation exercise by Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese monk who has helped to lead us in this field towards health and healing. And I've added some pieces in at the end with permission. So let's close our eyes for just a moment, and you'll hear some music and some bells. May the sound of these bells penetrate deep into the cosmos. Even in the darkest spots, living beings are able to hear them. In the hospital, in the clinics, in the homes, in the hospice, and in our own hearts, so that all suffering in them ceases and understanding comes to their heart, and they transcend the path of sorrow and death. The universal door to enlightenment is already open. The sound of the rising tide is heard clearly. the miracle happens. A beautiful child appears in the heart of a lotus flower. One single drop of this compassionate water is enough to bring back the refreshing spring to our mountains and our rivers. Listening to the bells, I feel the afflictions in me begin to dissolve. My mind calm, my body relaxed. A smile is born on my lips. Following the sound of the bells, my breath brings me back to the safe island of mindfulness. In the garden of my heart, the flowers of peace bloom beautifully. I hold in my mind a dedication to my trade and release from my heart the compassion to heal for myself and then my patients. On the next chime, I will slowly open my eyes and return to this everyday state of reality with mindful awareness and compassion for my imperfections, so that I may carry on my day with authenticity and with greater peace, joy, serenity, and compassion for my work. And you may open your eyes. And I thank you.